Recently, I had my appraisal, my yearly review, and I sat down and had some comments and helpful feedback from different people in our church. Looked at the question of how I'm doing as a pastor and how I'm growing as a person. It can actually be quite difficult questions to ask because we all have different expectations of what a pastor should be. We all might have favourite preachers or favourite church leaders or favourite people who look after us because of who they are and their style and the way that they do things. Jesus, in today's reading, in John 10, verses 1 to 21, he writes about being a pastor, being a shepherd. And he writes about people who are bad shepherds. The contrast is with the Pharisees who reacted so badly to Jesus healing someone who was born blind in yesterday's reading. And his teaching is incredible here. It's such a beautiful passage, and I'd encourage you to read it and really meditate on it today, to read it and read it and read it again. Jesus calls the other teachers, the other people we would listen to, kleptes and leistes, thieves and bandits, as some translations have it. The word bandit is probably better translated an insurrectionist, someone who is going to incite a riot or violence or rebel. He also calls them hired hands, people without skin in the game. In contrast, Jesus comes that we might have life and life in all its fullness. Jesus comes to lead us by his voice. Jesus comes to show us the way. Jesus comes to lay down his life for us. I guess the question is today, who are the hired hands speaking into your life? Who are we listening to? One of my favourite pastors when I started going to church in my youth was a really, really funny preacher. And I saw recently through online church that he was speaking in a church, and I thought, wow, I'm going to watch this and laugh along. And I watched him, and he was doing the same sermon that he'd basically done like 20 years ago when I started going to church. How do we weigh who is good shepherd and who would lead us astray? Well, the weight is with Jesus, his voice, his way. He is the one who leads us. He is the good shepherd. And everything else is a pale imitation. Other things can be helpful. Other teachings can be helpful. But actually coming to Jesus first, his words, coming to his words here today in John 10 is going to be far more profound and beautiful than any podcast or sermon or book or song that you could engage with today. That seems like it might cost a lot to focus on Jesus above all else. It does cost a lot. It costs him his life. However well-meaning the preachers and pastors and poets that we love are, ultimately, they don't pay the final price for us. When it costs them, they might leave. No matter how well-meaning they are on their journey with God, there's probably a little bit of self and motive in what they do. Jesus says he comes to bring life in all its fullness, and that comes through listening to his voice, the Good Shepherd. Jesus is telling us that the full life is the simple life. As we start our Lent journey today, there are so many fantastic Lent resources out there, extra things to think of and books we can read and things to engage with. And they're all good, and I encourage you, engage with them if you're engaging with them. But I just remind you today, maybe the writers of those are not brigands and thieves. But there is one good shepherd who has words and a way that lead to life. Don't put any preacher or speaker above Jesus. Seek his voice, seek his word first. Maybe you could write down some of the different voices in your life today and just ask yourself the honest question: how loud is the voice of Jesus in comparison to some of these other voices in my life?